wherever the answers are.
Stardate 97911.29. Welcome to Star Trek Discovery Pod, the #1 podcast about Michael Burnham. My name is Mike Moody, and with me on the view screen is
Mariah Gossett,
Grant Davis,
Clyde Haynes.
This week, guys, we're talking about Star Trek Discovery again in anticipation of Season 3 of Discovery, dropping soon. Fingers crossed, toes crossed.
Long anticipation, potentially.
Today, we're going to talk all about Michael Burnham, breaking down her character arc, sharing our opinions, and diving into what some of you, our listeners, have to say about Michael Burnham, played by Sonequa Martin-Green.
But before we dive into Michael Burnham, I wanted to just remind everybody listening to make sure you have subscribed to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you prefer to listen to your podcasts. However, if you could leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts specifically, that really helps us out. For all the links to Apple and Spotify, YouTube, and all the other places you can find the podcast, just visit StarTrekPod.co. That's StarTrekPod.co.
But Mariah, I've already given you guys my 5-star review. Is there some other way I could help you guys?
Yes.
Is it by chance patreon.com/StarTrekPod?
It is.
Go there and give us $1 or $2 per episode. Make it 2. We try to make that one the ideal minimum. I mean, you could totally do the $1. That's awesome. We love you guys for it. But you hit that $2, that's a sweet spot because you get exclusive access to our Slack channel, where we put up bonus little discussions. People are doing watch-alongs. I know that you guys are doing this 7 of 9 exclusive watch series, Mike and Mariah, and we're currently talking about the Genesis trilogy of Star Trek movies, which now I know what those are.
We've tricked you.
I got one more of these movies to watch, and it's a whale movie. I'm looking forward to a whale movie.
One.
Once again, that is patreon.com/StarTrekPod. Go there and help us out today, please. We really could use it. Thank you.
You know what else they could do, Grant?
What?
They could follow us at Star Trek Pod on Twitter. Get the word out. Tell people, hey, I've heard a great podcast. I'm listening to a great show. People want to know about it. So if you could just share the love on Twitter, we'd appreciate that too.
Clyde, you are so right. Hit up the socials, guys. Spread the good word about Star Trek Pod.
We've got some fun fans on Twitter too. Mike, do you want to tell people who we were tweeting with today?
Yeah, Robert Duncan McNeil. You might know him better as Tom Paris from Voyager. Tweeted out the pod, tweeted out our latest Best of 7 episode, because we talked about an episode that he directed, which is a great episode, called Someone to Watch Over Me. And he was like, hey, somebody's talking about the episode I directed. So he retweeted it and he put a nice little blurb on there saying it's a special episode for him. He's happy people are talking about it. And it's just great. Great to get that recognition from good old Tom Paris.
So impressive.
I appreciate the love anytime we get it.
So this week is a little different. If it's your first time listening, typically what we do is review the latest episode of Discovery. We also did that for Picard over the past few months. But today, we're kicking off a series discussing the arcs of some of the major characters on Star Trek Discovery. And this was Grant's idea, to profile our characters and maybe also talk about what lies ahead for them in Season 3. Today, it's all about Michael Burnham. So Grant, I'll let you take the con for now.
Wow, I'm honored. A little intimidated to be kicking off this new series, getting to talk about the lead protagonist for Star Trek Discovery, Michael Burnham. I think it's a fascinating way to dissect shows when you do a little bit more of a character study. You take a look at what the writers were hoping to achieve through the course of the first season and then the second season, kind of doing this detailed breakdown of the individual characters. I think it really informs more about not just the not just the character themselves, but also the show, its overall themes, and how those are reinforced, even at a more individual level. So yes, we're going to start with Michael Burnham, who is the first Black female lead on a Star Trek series. Very notable in that regard. She was very much inspired by Nichelle Nichols, who played Uhura. Ruby Bridges and Mae Jemison also were very influential in the development of her character. She was developed by Brian Fuller, who was the head showrunner at the start of season 1. I think it's gone through 3 showrunners at this point.
Yeah.
But he was the guy kicking things off. And when I was reading through everything, the original name for for the character was Rainsford, not Michael Burnham. Rainsford. I'm not really sure. I couldn't find out what the actual inspiration of Rainsford was. I did see that the Deadliest Game, this short story written in the 1920s, you're familiar with it. It's the one where the guy washes up on an island and there's a guy hunting him. Man is the deadliest game. That character who was being hunted was Rainsford, but I'm not sure if that's actually the literary reference they were going for with that name.
What is the name?
Rainsford.
Like Rainsford.
Correct.
I don't know who vetoed that one, but whoever said, let's go with Burnham, I toast you, sir.
Good call. Well,
Great
it was
call.
interesting because reading through it, it looked like while maybe it was going to be Rainsford, maybe that was a very short-term thing. They were going to have the character just be referred to as number 1 and not ever address what their actual name was until they decided to switch up what the story was going to be and have number 1 commit a little bit of mutiny. And so all of a sudden they're like, let's go ahead and give her a name.
Because it would be weird to keep calling the character number 1 when they were no longer number 1.
Right.
That would be
Can't do
odd
that anymore. So Michael Burnham was the name given, a male gendered name traditionally, at least in, the year 2020. The name, I think that's like a Brian Fuller thing that he likes giving the lead female characters like a male name.
Like in Hannibal, he did that in Hannibal with the lead. I forgot her name, but she had a man's name as well.
Yeah.
And then the character of Freddie Lowndes from the Hannibal books he cast a woman to play Freddie in Hannibal. Yeah, he's always doing stuff like that.
But I think that it's lent to kind of this idea of the future of Trek. The names don't necessarily strictly adhere to these kind of gender roles, these boundaries in the future, and maybe there's something a little bit more positive about that. She is not the captain of the ship as well, which I think is pretty notable, excluding her Mirrorverse doppelganger, evil Michael Burnham. But she's clearly the lead protagonist. And they were talking about how Burnham was not made the starship captain because they wanted to see a character from the lead character from a different perspective on the starship. One who has a different dynamic relationship with the captain and subordinates to give it a little bit of a richer context. And I think that was a quote from, what's his name? Alex
Kurtzman.
Kurtzman.
Yeah, I remember reading that before the show. Like everybody but Grant, I was super excited that they were bringing Trek back and kept reading every blurb I could get my hands on. And I remember reading that and thinking, oh, this is going to be cool. This is basically going to be TNG from the perspective of Riker.
Mm-hmm.
That'll be interesting. I can get with that. Man, I could not have been more wrong.
Well, the way that they decided to flesh out and develop this character is Michael Burnham is a woman caught between two worlds, essentially. She is born human, raised Vulcan. So it is kind of paralleling and in a way contrasting with the role of Spock, who they also made her stepbrother as a result of being raised by Sarek and Amanda. So whereas he is half human and half Vulcan biologically, she is all human, but is suppressing emotionally a lot of her human tendencies as she was raised to traditionally value the Vulcan ideals.
Can I
Right?
jump in? Can I jump in real quick? Like, what did you guys think about that? That we have a human character, but she's been raised on Vulcan. She's dealing with trauma, but she's raised on Vulcan. And especially in the first few episodes, and then we get those flashback scenes of her when she first arrives on the Shenzhou. How did you guys feel with Sonequa Martin-Green, who most of us were familiar with her from The Walking Dead, where she plays this really strong emotional character? And now we're seeing her, at least initially, playing this inhibited Vulcan who's struggling to get her emotions out. But when they do come out, they just kind of burst out. What do you think about that decision to make her, to kind of put her in a Vulcan box for a while?
I mean, I think Trek kind of set the precedent for that with Seven of Nine. You know, it's another character who is human, but then had a great trauma and then is raised Borg, right? And then is kind of learning to come out of it. And we kind of see a similar, I think, emotional journey. It could just be we've been talking about Seven of Nine, so I could just be coming out of left field. But I think the precedent is kind of there for Trek as a canon. But I also really enjoy her performance, specifically as Michael Burnham, because I have enjoyed seeing the range that she's offered to the role. And when we do get those flashbacks, seeing a more Vulcan-esque side of her and sort of her approach to how she problem solves. And then as we've seen through season 1 and 2, she's had to learn to use her humanity in order to be a better problem solver and leader.
Yeah. And I would add, I wasn't quite sure about Sonequa Martin-Green at the very onset. So before the show really aired, I wasn't quite sure because, you know, Mike, like you mentioned, we were familiar with her from The Walking Dead. And I was just like, that seems like a big leap to Trek. But I was like, let's see what happens. And I've been really impressed. And I think the character in your traditional Star Trek kind of history that this most reminds me of is actually Worf, right? For a reason that is similar and a reason that is completely dissimilar. One is that I believe at one point Worf was raised by humans, right? And so you had this whole kind of, again, so we've seen this before where you take someone from one very different culture and they're raised by someone in almost the antithesis culture. And so that's not super strange. But for me, what was interesting is they took a Black woman and put her in the role of a Vulcan, of a human raised by Vulcan who is very measured and logical, which I feel like you don't see that often. I mean, you've got Tuvok, but you know, that role on television is often expected to be someone who's very emotional, which Worf was, right? Very prone to outbursts. And yet Sonequa Martin-Green's character, you know, Burnham is very measured, very, even in the midst of mutiny, it's a pragmatic approach. But Mariah, to your point, we're seeing that emotion that she starts to develop, that she allows back in, this humanity, actually makes her a much fuller, well-rounded, and, you know, hero character. So I thought it was an interesting way to look at it and completely unexpected from what I expected from Trek.
I also think a little bit piggybacking off of that idea is through our modern lens, seeing a Black female lead who is, by the nature of her character's backstory, told to suppress emotion, be very calm and structured, and is kind of this commentary a little bit on the unfair expectations kind of put on Black women in society, and getting to unpeel layers and have that true humanity in her unveiled progressively through the seasons, maybe a little bit slower than necessary, but that she gets to express that human side a bit more is, I think it's good and powerful when they do it properly.
Well, and I think the other thing that we're seeing here that is so different is, I'll say that Sonequa Martin-Green is a beautiful woman. However,
What? Yeah.
Yes.
this is a situation where her sexuality is not a critical component of her character,
Right.
which for Trek, unfortunately,
Huge.
is almost unheard of.
Yeah, there's no male
Right.
gaze on this show.
Yeah, so from Uhura to Troy to Seven of Nine, there's always been a character who is incredibly competent, but their sexuality and their allure, their desirability has been a key component of the way that character is written. And we don't see that here. And I think it's incredible.
Yeah, it's really nice to see in this new Trek era that fully sort of realized female character, like what we can be more than just smart and sexy. It's like there can be other combinations of personalities and we'll probably get to that as we talk about other characters like Tilly and Tig, and we get these wide varieties of women and other and other genders and expressions and sexuality on this ship that it's so refreshing to see. And I think Burnham is a great sort of anchor to that, because it is the opportunity to truly show what I hope the future looks like on this ship, specifically starting with her as this lead character that we're following along with her journey.
Well, it's funny because the representation on this show is unprecedented in Star Trek, even though Star Trek has always tried to be a little more progressive about representation on all of its previous shows. But this show does represent society today a lot better than a lot of other science fiction shows. It just, we don't often see the representation on screen the way we do here. And it all starts with Sonequa Martin-Green as Burnham. I mean, I love seeing Star Trek, this 40 plus 50-year-old franchise that has fans of so many different generations ask us to follow this new iteration and this new starship crew and all their adventures, finally through the eyes of a Black woman who's smart, who's always growing, and is also very flawed.
And to the point of her being flawed, I think this was a very smart and deliberate choice by the creators to have us introduced to this new world within Trek with a character who is still, I was going to say green, a little bit younger, pun intended, green, in so much as that she doesn't fully know who she is as a character, as a leader. She's not all the way there. She still has a lot to learn. She's emotionally suppressed in ways that result in kind of outbursts of decisions that are not necessarily all the way thought through. And I think the first season does this kind of redemption arc exploration of that, tabled by a mutiny in the beginning and a mutiny at the end, one of which was probably an impulsive and bad decision, and the other one at the end, which kind of realizes the ideals of what Starfleet represents. And because she is a younger character trying to learn about these experiences in this world in real time, we get to go on that journey with her and explore an arc. Whereas like a character like Pike or maybe Picard, these seasoned characters who are these leaders who already know who they are, you can rely on them. There's not as much to explore in a character like that, where they're going to really develop themselves And I think modern storytelling requires this a bit more. Like Georgiou, if we were just following Georgiou, I'm not sure we would be learning along with her. But take a Georgiou from the Mirror universe who's always had her hackles up and is very defensive and is always this in this fight mode, and then have her introduced to this society where the only person she cares about is this pseudo daughter figure in this world, and suddenly she's interesting and she can have an arc again. Like the way they've played with these other characters, they've made it these really smart decisions that allow you to continue to explore them and have them grow from season to season.
Yeah, I do think that Burnham personifies that idea of modern storytelling. And it was, for me, I can only speak for me, it was an adjustment, right? I really thought I was going to get traditional Trek with this. And to your point, a traditional Trek follows Pike, right? And so I think that's interesting that we haven't really seen movement on this idea that people have said, I want a Pike show, I want a Pike show. But if a Pike show is going to be TNG, right? Pike is Picard, he is Janeway, he is Kirk, he is Cisco.
It's going to be more traditional, yeah.
Would you say, Mike?
It's going to be more traditional.
It is. He knows who he is. He's the smartest person in the room. He's the lead. He's the hero. It's clear, right? And his flaws are hero flaws, right? I want to do too much. I want to save everybody. It's the traditional stuff. With Burnham, you're getting somebody on the upswing. It's Picard on the Stargazer. You know, it is. It's early, when they were making their mistakes and figuring out who they were, and then you're with them along the ride. And then, 10 years from now we're looking at the Burnham Captain show where she's leading a team of rookies, and that's a different show. So this was huge, and I was a little uncomfortable with what I was getting because of the expectations I had going in. And I would say definitely by season 2, the ride was phenomenal. It was like, oh, I'm fully invested in this. I want more of this.
Yeah, I hear you, Clyde, about the trepidation with how different the narrative was on Discovery. I actually loved it. I was ready for something different. And one of the initial things that made Burnham so compelling to me was this very clear idea that she was on this journey of self-discovery. She's this human raised by Vulcans on Vulcan, dealing with the trauma, dealing with the loss of her parents, and brought up to be this exceptional student and high achiever on Vulcan. But like a lot of us who get out in the real world and learn what we learned in school doesn't quite prepare us for stuff in the real world, she has to adapt from this socially awkward, logic-first scientist to a person of action. She's on a journey to seeing she has to find the strength in her humanity, which is something that she's tried to suppress all her life. And she has to learn how to be vulnerable, let her emotions out. And yeah, we're just on a journey with her. We're on a journey with her in which she keeps being molded and tested by the biggest events in the universe, right? And that's kind of what makes this Star Trek. We're seeing this character molded by these universe-changing events, and now she's rocketed almost 1,000 years into the future for season 3, and I can't wait to see what they throw at her next season and how she reacts to it all.
Well, let's take a step back to the very first episode. Then the pilot 2-parter has her commit this mutiny. And I know that you guys had some reservations about how that unfolds, but if we look just strictly at her character and what she goes through in the first few episodes, how they introduce her and kind of the picture we get of what this character is leading up to her committing the mutiny. What did you guys think of that then? And now kind of looking back on how they've developed the character, what do you think of it now?
I think it was an interesting way to bring us into the world. It almost felt like getting introduced to a character like Don Draper or what's his face from Breaking Bad?
Walter White.
Walter White, right. So
Saul-
it's
Saul
these
Goodman.
like people who seemingly seem likable, then there's something unlikable, and then they have to rebuild however that looks. I think, Walter White and Don Draper obviously go down very different paths, and it fits Star Trek for Burnham's arc to be that of redemption and growth versus continuing to fall down the rabbit hole. Like she saw the rabbit hole and instead of diving in, decided to come out of it. Does that make any sense? And I thought it was an interesting way to introduce us to our main character, because I think from like even the marketing stuff before there were full trailers for anything, just assumed we were going to get another captain, and I was really stoked about it. And then I was like, oh, this is going to be very different. But I agree with you, Clyde. I think season 2 is really where that character starts to really shine and take hold, and I root for her way more than I did in the first season. I also felt like the first season was much more of that, like, to compare maybe to like a Starbuck type character from Battlestar Galactica, where it's a little rebellious, but there's something there that's redeemable.
I think your Alice in Wonderland thing, though, is a perfect comparison. It's more like she's fallen into this new surreal world. I mean, when I reflect back on that first episode, I recall that when I first watched it, I really enjoyed everything. I think that hits a lot of the beats of just more modern television storytelling that I'm familiar with, rather than me having a preconceived, I guess, hangups about whether or not this reflects Star Trek. But that said, when she made those decisions, I was kind of like, I'm on board with her, even if she's being impulsive. Somehow I feel like she must be in the right. Turns out now when I look back, I'm like, no, she wasn't probably in the right. She was probably making a bad call that now we can look at in hindsight and see, like, it got Georgiou killed. It was a bad call, and it was very destructive. And so I understand why she got her like life sentence for that. But then she does kind of like you were saying too, Mike, she falls down the rabbit hole. She's now in this wonderland where she's our protagonist, but at the same time, she's a little bit passive to the events going on, because there's bigger, wondrous things going on with a mycelial network in the first season, with a ship jumping through space and time, and Lorca being kind of crazy, and then this mirrorverse, and all of it, she's kind of being pulled along rather than being the one who's kind of take charge and the point figure. And I thought through the first season, there's this gradual growth of her character to learning that she has what it takes to kind of assume this leadership role. But at the same time, yes, she's a little bit more of a passenger along for the ride until the end. And in the second season, she's the driving force for a lot of it.
Yeah, I'd add, I think I'm split probably in the middle between Grant and Mariah. On one hand, I looked at her like Starbuck and like really kind of a James T. Kirk from the Abram movies, in the fact that she's rebellious, she's out there, but she's the lead, and in typical sci-fi fashion, I'm going to ride with her because she must know something I don't. And so very early on, I was thinking, okay, well, she's in the right? And we looked at it and it was like the Vulcan hello, and it's about attacking first because Klingons will respect you. And she had this wisdom, is knowledge that nobody else had, and nobody was listening. So this is your traditional sci-fi stuff where you're like, yeah, I'm with her. She knows, right? And then I look back and I want to go, she was wrong, but I'm not sure. Mm-hmm. I don't know that there was a winnable solution in that situation. I think she was in a situation where she was like, I've got two bad choices. And
she couldn't Kirk her way out of it.
Exactly. She couldn't Kirk her way out of it. There wasn't some way to cheat the system. And maybe, Mariah, to that point, maybe that was the first glimpse that this was different and that she wasn't Kirk. She wasn't Picard, who there's always an answer. There's always a way. Here's that thing that no one has ever thought of, and I've got it. And this is how, we're going to sum this up in 60 minutes and everything's going to be great. And then we're going to move on to the next planet.
No cheat code on the Kobayashi Maru for
Nothing.
Michael Burnham. Yeah.
But it's also important to note that she failed in her mutiny, right?
Yeah.
Like, she didn't actually get to fire that shot. So she escalated the conflict, but without gaining that respect of the Klingons that was kind of crucial.
Yeah.
So she kind of just lost on both fronts, and then Georgiou died. And it was kind of like, ooh, I really fucked up.
I really like the idea of the mutiny at the beginning because we get this picture of, like we said before, this person who feels kind of out of place being raised on Vulcan and now in Starfleet. And again, the plot sets her up and puts her in this place where she has to rebuild herself again after the mutiny.
Fall from grace.
Exactly, in the Shenzhou. And she has to find her place again within Starfleet to try and seek redemption for disobeying her captain and what many saw as an act of mutiny and unprovoked aggression against the Klingons. Although, as viewers, we know the situation was a little more complex, but to this day, like Clyde said, I'm still not sure if she made the right call or not. There was just no winnable situation there. At the beginning, I was ride or die with her on that situation or on that call. But after everything we've seen and uncovered, I'm not sure she made the right call, but I feel empathy for her, in that situation. Like, I don't know what I would do.
Well, I think it's interesting, Mike. You bring up something that I think has been super fascinating to me was that redemption arc, not overall, but really for the crew of the Shenzhou, right? Like seeing, and I can never remember her name, but Kayla, yes. But like Kayla.
Mike always remember Kayla.
Mike's never going to forget Kayla.
Wrist.
Yeah. But just when she steps onto the Discovery and she's seeing Kayla, right? And she's seeing, Saru. She's seeing all these people and they're giving her the stink eye, right? Like they're like, I can't believe she's here. That and how now we look at where she is and they will literally lay down their lives for her, right? Like they were like, I will gladly die so that you can move ahead. Like that,
right?
That's amazing. Like that arc was phenomenal for me.
And that's earned. They took the time, they earned it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say over the 2 seasons, they really developed those inter-character relationships so that it's believable that these folks would lay down on the line for her and that she would do the same for them, especially right at the very end of season 2. We see her in this little fly through the galaxy suit and she's like, I'm gonna go back in time in order to stop this giant evil thing. You all don't have to do it, but of course they do. Well,
and we see that she tried to give her life for Arium, and then Arium turned around and gave her life for them. Right. So it's right there where to your point, Mariah, she would lay down her life for her crew and they would lay down their life for her. Right. And that's what you want out of Trek. That's the type of ship that you want to see.
See, the thing I've come to understand a bit better about the Trekverse is that, like, I was really enjoying the first season, but now seeing how the second season played out, I have a better understanding and appreciation for what it is that a lot of Trekkies revere about Trek, in that, like, that first season it's grittier. It's a lot of action and it's a driving force that doesn't leave a lot of breathing room for these smaller intimate moments.
Thank you, Lorca.
That I think was opened up a lot more in the second season. You see that you see these little dance between Stamets and Burnham, that like these kind of these character building moments that that are crucial to it not just being a collection of interesting people on a ship, but a family that is ride or die, like you're saying. And
yeah, and I was just going to say, I think Trek has done so well, and I think the show is building there in building that true ensemble cast as well. You know, not to fully deter from Burnham, but I think it helps to have that anchor of a character, you know, you can always come back to see how they're interacting with the other characters, to be your guide through the episode and through the series. And, you know, I think that's what a lot of old Trek does as well. And I think we're finally feeling that a little bit more into this. And it's something that I hope we continue to build on, because it does occur in, you know, more modern television writing. I think a lot about like Michael Schur's big ensemble cast shows and how successful those are, but you are always, you know, kind of anchored by a singular main character. And I'm hoping for season 3, I think, as we've said a few times when we're talking and hoping and waiting for season 3, that we're going to get a lot more of those smaller moments between some of these side characters with our main character.
Grant,
well,
go ahead.
Oh, good.
Oh, earlier when you were going down Burnham's character arc, we got to the point where you were talking about how she was orphaned as a kid. And I think you're about to get to the part where she was raised by none other than Sarek, Spock's father.
Right.
Which was kind of a controversial plot point to many Trekkies.
Kind of. It was huge.
Okay, well,
The butt of many jokes.
Other than me, like Clyde, you're the biggest Trekker on the pod. What'd you think about that initially, and how do you feel about it now?
Well, okay. So initially, I was struggling with this, right? Because it took me a long time to move off of this idea that I knew Trek, right? And it's kind of like when I first saw the Abrams movies, I was kind of like, don't come in here messing with my canon, right? Like you're coming in here because you have this new interpretation. You're going to do things different. Don't mess with my canon. And so, you know, I was one of those Trekkies who, as you're reading and you're looking and you're watching this unfold, you're going, but that doesn't line up. And what about here? And so this particular plot point was like, you're going to introduce her as the daughter of Sarek, therefore the sister of Spock. And in 20, 30 years of watching, listening, being around Trek, I have never heard this person's name. How are you going to sell me on this? And it took them 2 seasons to get us to a point that every time they said the word Spock, you were in the back of your mind going, yeah, but I've never heard of him having a sister. And then it was the joke that wouldn't end is you keep talking about him, yet you never show him. Right? Like, do they write letters? Like,
you know, Clyde, we have documented evidence in the form of podcasts of you complaining episode after episode of how this isn't going to work or where it's Spock.
Yes. And so I struggle with this, and I'll be the first one to say when it all came down by the end of season 2, I held up my hands and said, I buy that. That works.
Yeah,
Right?
I knew this was going to come because obviously you've talked about this a lot on the pod, but I wanted to get that on record during this podcast all about Michael Burnham. For me, it didn't bug me. I mean, I don't really care about canon too much, even though I love Star Trek.
Yeah, I mean, it's just generally that principle of like, you can write any batshit thing you want into a story as long as you are clever enough to work out an explanation. And there's a lot of clever writers out there that can figure out ways to navigate this. And I thought how they handled it with this show was well done. It works for me. I mean, I didn't have necessarily those hangups. In fact, marketing wise, I thought it was kind of a smart call. For me, it always felt like Trek is for Trekkies. And how do you expand the audience beyond just the Trek fans and get other people interested in this world? And And if this show is kind of just the same old, I don't know if this would resonate with someone like me as much when I've already crossed my arms and gone like, I don't know about this show or this world. So when they were able to introduce this kind of storytelling within the world of Trek, but also have these kind of heavy-handed ties into something that is at least pop culture familiar for me, like Spock. Spock is somehow related to this storyline. This character is like related to Spock. Then I'm kind of like, okay, I get it. I have a little bit of a frame of reference of who this Spock guy is. He's the guy who made that Hobbit music video. I get it. So I can roll with that. And I thought it worked in a way that was pretty compelling for a rich character on her own, but also how it tied into the world at large and ultimately didn't ruin, I guess, the canon for you guys is win-win-win.
Yeah, and we got to see Spock in season 2, and some of the best scenes and most emotional scenes of this entire series are between Michael Burnham and the new young Spock. Like, they really decided to pay that off with a really rich dynamic between those two characters.
Yeah, and I mean, and who doesn't have just deep, dark family secrets just lying around? I think it's very plausible.
Well, I think that's also a lot of what season 2 was exploring.
Hold up.
Whereas
That makes me want to buy Mariah beer. I got to hear more about these deep, dark secrets.
You'll never know.
But whereas the first season I saw as more of this kind of redemption arc for her, kind of getting her groove back and figuring out how to find her place in Starfleet and become a leader. The second season was kind of her exploring her past, her origins, her legacy, and we had that explored on both her human side and her Vulcan side. We got the reveal of the Red Angel being her mom, how her parents disappeared in the first place and how she was orphaned, but also a richer exploration of her relationship with Sarek and with Spock, her brother, and
Amanda,
and how she was divided on what her identity is and kind of coming to grips with embracing what strengths she derives from all of it, I think. So in that regards, I thought it was also pretty successful in how those emotional beats were hitting for her, and she was learning more about herself and gaining this self-confidence and conviction in who she is and how she can lead, which I think is ultimately important to her overall trajectory for Trek.
Have y'all watched the short Trek? That's the little animated one about how stars came to be.
Oh, with her
supposed to be.
It's Burnham's dad reading her the African myth. Yeah, that's really good.
Anyway, it's really cute, and I think it's like, I appreciate that even in something that's clearly made that they wanted to appeal more to children in the form of this short Trek, there's still like Michael Burnhamisms in the child, and like you can see the wonderment and the kid character wanting to explore and know more and to be very thoughtful, and kind of seeing that sort of very like the very tip of her origin story, right? Because we've seen a lot of her once she's on Vulcan, but we haven't seen a lot of what happened when she was just living with her parents, besides her parents getting, killed
right
at that point. So I thought it was cute. So if anyone else hasn't checked it out, I would recommend it.
Well, I think we should actually discuss her relationship with her parents and with her parental figures and how that informs her character a little bit, because it does seem important, both her human side, how she related to her scientific parents and her initial upbringing, and then how she embraced what Vulcanism is and suppressed certain aspects of herself, and then talking about her relationship with her semi-surrogate mother, Georgiou, also seems like she has these very rich and conflicting relationships with parents, which is always rife for good drama.
Yeah, and I think it's like from a production standpoint, I think it's hilarious that Sonequa Martin-Green's husband plays her father.
Oh,
For
The
real?
actor, yeah. So the actor who plays her dad is her husband.
Mike Burnham?
Mike Burnham is played by Sonequa Martin-Green's husband. But yeah, I think you can see those. What am I trying to say here? So I think Burnham takes the pieces of like interest and scientific methodology and thinking and the idea of the importance of science. You know, I think she saw from an early age the importance of science if her parents were willing to sort of risk their lives in order to be able to do these sort of things. And so I think to her, the study of science and her going into that as a science officer makes sense to me as a character in trying to emulate both her human parents and then also the logic that she grew up with on Vulcan.
yeah, that's a good point. Her other mommy, because she has three mommies, right? She has Amanda Grayson and her mom, who was a Red Angel, and then Georgiou. Or
It's a new sitcom, I think,
Yeah.
coming to CBS. My Three Mommies.
my three space mommies. It's
CBS
actually
All
four.
Access. They would run that show too. My Three Space Mommies. They would do that.
She actually has four if you count Mira Georgiou. But her relationship with Georgiou, who is kind of her third mommy, the original Georgiou, continues with Mira Georgiou because Burnham is still on this redemption arc when she meets Mira Georgiou, and then Mira Georgiou is brought over to the Prime universe, and she is able to continue seeking redemption in the eyes of Georgiou, and they put another layer on it where she is in the process of trying to rehabilitate or redeem this mirror version of Georgiou. So
Where Georgiou is still trying to find her own daughter
Right.
in
in Michael,
Burnham, yeah,
Exactly.
which
Yeah.
isn't her daughter. It's very well done, and it's executed well because of how great those two actors are.
Yes, sir.
Do you guys think that Burnham is the type of character who is independent or who needs parental approval?
I don't know that she, quote, needs parental approval, but what I do see is a character who lost something early and has been trying to find that pretty much her entire life.
Fill that void.
And I think in part because I don't know that she's ever dealt with that loss, right? Ever like, has she ever really come to terms with it? And so I think she has found some at times incredible ways to feel that need and that loss in the form of what I would say have been world-class mentors. When you look at Sarek and Amanda and Georgiou, I mean, come on. I would sign up to have that trio of mentors any day of the week. So she found some incredible surrogates. But I think if you look at her patterns, and not just in how like these parental figures she latches on to, right? And you kind of toss Pike into that group too, right?
I would take him as my mentor, but not the other three.
Yeah, I mean, but also
Maybe not Sarah.
Even in her other relationships, right, where she's trying to figure out who she is. At some point, we can't talk about Burnham and not talk about Tyler Vach, but
Right.
I think you see these torn, trying to fumble through these relationships and these constructs where she's allowing all of this to almost happen to her. And I think toward the end of season 2, she starts to stand up and says, no, now I'm trying to define the relationships that I'm going to have with all of these, right? I'm going to take control over what this relationship is going to be for me. And that is some incredible growth that we see. And Mariah, to your point earlier, it's not something that happens in the arc of 60 minutes, but it happens in the arc of 2 seasons. And so it's gradual and incremental and pretty fascinating. Grant's going to disagree.
Well, no, I'm just gonna say to you bringing up Vok, Ash Tyler, is this a relationship worth us discussing, or do you guys feel as I do that it's embarrassing and that should go in the Hall of Embarrassing Boyfriends?
I think the Hall of Embarrassing Boyfriends are important to her character growth. Yeah. I think she needed to not only feel that familial relationship with the crew, but the idea that she can have some kind of romance was important for her character arc and important for her personal growth. Because I was trying to confirm before we got on here, isn't her kiss with Ash Tyler like her first kiss?
Yeah,
I think so.
Yeah, it is.
And so it's like those are important milestones on a personal level, especially seeing her coming from Vulcan, where a lot of that emotion is suppressed. And I think a part of her coming to terms with her humanity is figuring out how she feels about romantic love. And I think it was important for her, especially towards the end when she does make that choice of saying, no, I'm going to choose my career over this relationship and stay on the ship and, not sacrifice myself for a relationship, which I think we typically see of female characters. And so this was the opposite, and really I think showed her to be our Trek main character, because like Picard and like Janeway and all of these other, iconic captains who were willing to push aside their romantic lives for their jobs and for their careers, Burnham also has to at least have that option and have the choice.
I noticed you didn't say Kirk in that list of people pushing away romance.
Oh yeah, no, Kirk is all about the romance. No. He loves him a good green space babe.
Well, yes. I mean, I agree with you completely, Mariah, and the fact that I'm imagining that no one here married their first big significant other. Is that right? Anybody?
That is correct.
I did.
Okay. Well,
so 1 out of
4. It's safe to say that those early relationships probably formed who you were a little bit, right? Like that first time you had to go, yeah, this is a train wreck. I think we're seeing that with Burnham. And again, it's very different than what you would expect of a lead in Trek, right? You would even Kirk, they had all gotten to a point where they were mature in their relationships, at least what they wanted, decisions they made. Kirk decided he was going to be a hoe, and he did that.
Through and through.
He did that as well as Picard was able to say, I'm going to say no to everyone, including Vosh.
Can I just say, I love that you characterize Kirk as a hoe and not a pimp.
I mean,
he's not controlling anybody. He is fairly in control of himself.
Yes, I love it.
He's saying
slutting is a habit.
He's saying yes to all comers. Like he's like, hey, how you doing? Let's go.
With the Ash Tyler romance, the show didn't always. It wasn't a strong part of the show, but when I think about that romance, I think about that scene where, like Mariah mentioned, the first kiss. I think about that and how nervous she was going to that party and how awkward she was because she'd never been to a party.
That was good, though.
Yeah, she never expressed love in that way or any type of affection, and we got to see all of that play out in that episode, and it was just a lovely picture of her. Like the 7 of 9 episode we just covered, Mariah, on Best of 7, Seven's first date and Seven learning about relationships. That was depicted in that episode so well. And yeah, when I think about Ash Tyler, I don't have a lot of fond memories, but that's one of the good ones.
Do you guys see her stepping into the role of captain in this season, or ever? Like, and if so, like, what type of captain would she be?
If I were in the writer's room for this show, the very last episode of this show is her becoming a captain of a ship.
Yeah.
I'm on board.
Oh,
with that.
this is all just her freshman year kind of thing, or
Well,
freshman through sophomore.
We obviously, in this time jump, are going to a place where Starfleet no longer exists. And I think that's, or in its what we think of Starfleet, right? And so there's going to have to be quite, at least, I hope, a few season journey to get us to the point where maybe a semblance of a new Starfleet, a better Starfleet, is in existence. And because this new creation of Starfleet is in existence, that would be the opportunity, because of all her work, to kind of recreate it and to do all these things. She would somehow then either become a captain or someone in charge, at least.
I feel like if she can restart Starfleet in 1,000 years in the future, she gets to go back and just be head of Starfleet when she returns. Like, she bypasses captain and admiral, and she's just like, she's queen of Starfleet. She wins.
I would like to see a subversion of her becoming captain. I'd rather see her support someone else like Tilly. I would love the series to end with Tilly as the captain or a captain, and getting to a point of crisis where maybe she's not going to become captain, and Burnham, through all of her experiences and friendship and growth, helps and inspires Tilly to get there. And so they can kind of both share in that, because I think that friendship is a big part of the heart of the show. You can't really talk about Burnham without mentioning Tilly. It's basically her first friend, and that relationship is so rich, as we saw,
They're
especially
Turk
in
and
season
JD.
2.
Mike, you and everybody else is trying to find any way to bring back Captain Killy.
Well, yeah.
Yes.
Everybody wants Killy to come back. No, I agree with both of you in that this story seems like it's a story of that journey, and I think they're in a situation where they're in no rush. They've got a franchise that they can really have for the duration. You want 7 seasons? Great. You want 10 seasons? You're there. You have built something that feels like it can last, and you've got a fan base that will watch. And so I think from a writer's room, a production standpoint, don't rush it. And you've done a really good job thus far by not rushing those moments. So you could literally have 10 seasons of the growth of Burnham. And to your point, Mariah, at the end, now that's that graduation and she's ready to be captain. And that's a great kind of, finale. And you've got plenty of time to get there. Nobody's in a rush. Like you're there. But the question that you asked, Grant, it's interesting because I'm not ready for her to be captain now. I think the setup is perfect. The question though is who, and does it become this gimmick? So I'm not ready to see Saru as captain. I'm just.
But he got rid of his gangly.
I know, but
he's a man now.
he's got his big boy pants on, but I'm not.
Yeah,
quite
he's
ready.
no longer afraid. He's going to be in charge.
So maybe that'll change me. But I also don't want to see this revolving door of guest star captains, right? Like we've gone 2 seasons, right? Where each season you get the captain that comes in and is captain for a season and then leaves.
Picard's a robot now. He could totally show up at Discovery and be like, I'm the captain now.
Exactly. All of this stuff. But it's going to get kind
Spoiler.
of kitschy and real gimmicky fast. So I'm not ready to see her, but I'm not sure who.
But okay, this leads to my last particular question for this episode regarding her, and that is, where do we expect her to go in season 3 with her arc? Because from the trailer, which we did a breakdown of a couple weeks ago, it looks like our crew of science officers is now no longer in simply a realm where they are seeking out scientific discovery, right? They seem to be in a realm of politics and war. And so they're going to have to shift their roles pretty quickly, and they're going to need a wartime captain, I'm thinking.
Kelly.
And I mean,
Giorgio.
maybe Giorgio is there too, but Giorgio is fucking ruthless. It seems like I could definitely see that Burnham has the instincts of Giorgio, but with the clarity of mind to execute it in the most like rational form for the betterment of everyone. And I could see her stepping into more of like a captain role. But if that's the case, what we've seen of her leadership, I feel like she knows how to be the sacrificial lamb for leadership. She knows how to step in and do the hard job, but does she know how to push others to do the hard role for her? Does she know how to give someone else in sacrifice of the cause? I don't know if she does, and I think that is an uncomfortable, necessary element of a leadership. Can you have someone else go to their death for everyone? And can she be the type of leader to do that? And I'm just wondering if that might be something we explore here.
Yeah, I don't know. I've been thinking about the trailer a lot, and I'm wondering if they've like bait and switched us a little bit. And I'm wondering if all of those scenes are from the very first episode. And so,
wow.
It's one of those things where I'm like, maybe they've only teased us like 10 minutes into this, and I have no idea where season 3 is going to go beyond this Federation's issue.
You could be totally right.
I'm with you.
And so I was like, the first episode is that kind of time lapse recap of where we're at, moving into joining back up with the crew. And then from there, I have no idea where we're going with the rest of the season until it starts, which I kind of
hate when you do this, Mariah. You sold me on something amazing for where Picard could have gone, and then it didn't happen. And I was just like, I'm left with a paler version. Why isn't Mariah one of the writers on Star Trek?
Again, I'm pre-WGA and I have a writer's packet available. But yeah, so I don't know where we're going in season 3. I think a logical step is either going to be Saru or Giorgio in some capacity, sort of taking over the ship, whether that's by force, if it's Giorgio for a time period, which I could also see happening for a minute, or Saru kind of taking the default.
Or by pity. Fine, Saru. I guess you can have leadership for a little bit.
I think Pike really inspired Saru to like have that moment and to take charge, and so I think it would be a logical arc in that character. And I know we're gonna talk about Saru in another episode, and so we can kind of get into it there. But I don't think we're gonna see Burnham as a captain of Discovery this season.
Yeah,
right.
I don't think
not
so
a formal
either.
captain.
No.
Right.
Jonathan Frakes was talking about season 3 a few days ago, and he said that Burnham in season 3 has found a new core because she's separated from the Discovery crew, and she's found a new partner in crime. And that's what a lot of the show is going to be about this season. I think that's that new character book.
Books, right.
So my guess is she is going to be separated from Discovery a little longer than we think she might be. And she might, form a new relationship with this new person and then somehow have to advocate to get this new person integrated with the crew based on her relationships with them and him and navigate those waters. So that'll be one like personal challenge that she'll have to go through.
I'm putting it at 3 episodes. She's separated 3 episodes. That's where I'm at.
Yeah.
I was just thinking Clyde was going to be like, this is his new refrain. Instead of when is Spock going to show up? When is Burnham going to reunite with
Oh, that's probably
When's
going
it
to
gonna
happen.
happen?
Expect that. So
Yeah.
No,
When is the team up?
Yes.
Where's the team up?
no, but I think also, especially for the 3rd season of a show, this is where you typically will get a nice influx of new characters. If you think about it, we didn't really get any new characters with the exception of like really one, right? So we got Pike last year.
And Spocky.
Yeah, but we've been talking about Spock, and we were waiting on Spock. So it was new to us, but he had been talked about. Now we're going to get some brand new characters. I think the question will be how many, and I do think they're going to fill out the crew. Because honestly, I have often felt like the Discovery's been running like a skeleton crew, like they have not had enough people.
I mean, I don't know. We also got one of my favorite characters of last season, which was Tig Notaro, and I always forget who her character's name was. But
Jet Reno.
Jet Reno.
Reno, that's
Who
right.
was in
But
like
Jet
2
Reno is
episodes,
awesome.
and
now I'm
never seen since.
now I'm not sure if we're gonna get her again, and I'm really hoping that we see some more of her.
Well, she was part of the group that traveled to the future.
Yeah.
At the end of the season 2.
Yeah. I'm wondering how much we'll see of her, though, because I believe she had some health issues
Yeah.
this past year. So I'm not sure if she was what the production schedule was
I haven't
like, but
seen her in much of the promo material either.
Oh,
yeah.
no. Did her cancer come back?
I don't remember what it was specifically, but she posted about it on her social media about being in the hospital.
For anyone who doesn't know, she did a comedy special where right before she went on stage, she found out she had cancer, and she did her whole set. It wasn't a special. It was like just one of her sets. But she gets up on stage and just starts, she changes everything and just starts talking about cancer. And it is powerful, powerful stuff. It is so good. And I highly recommend, if you guys are even kind of into her, you need to watch it. It's amazing.
It's an all-timer. And she dramatizes that moment and the fallout after it in her Amazon show, One Mississippi, which is just amazing. It's a great show. Do we want to jump into some of these listener comments before we wrap up? We got some really good listener comments about Burnham.
Let's do a couple.
Let's
Sure.
do it.
All right. Mag says, I'm sure this has been said before, but for me, the creation and casting of the character Michael Burnham is significant in breaking barriers in science fiction. Her image in the promotional trailers for season 1, along with those of Michelle Yeoh, is what drew me to Discovery. First, we are given a view of a woman and a new view, not as a captain like Janeway, but as a first officer and then a specialist. Second, she's a brilliant scientist, which provides an important role model for girls interested in STEM disciplines. Third, as a woman of color, Burnham occupies a central role rarely seen in sci-fi. Her blackness is not an issue nor a source of identity, but racial discrimination does play out in terms of Vulcan and human differences. During her early years on Vulcan, Burnham suffers racial discrimination because she is human. Yeah, I like all those points.
Species discrimination.
Yep.
Species discrimination. That's true. Yeah, I like the idea of Burnham being a STEM role model.
Right. Yeah, I think I don't think it can be overstated how important it is a character like hers, and how powerful it is for changing the dynamics of what Trek shows and how the stories kind of play out, especially if it doesn't have to be, if it's accepted without it having to be a plot point consistently. And I think she brings up, like, I'm not familiar with this, but was Sisko's blackness an element that would come up in the show?
It did significantly a few times. Yeah, for sure.
And that was huge too. Like his whole,
That's important.
like it was huge.
Right.
I think the difference though is, quite frankly, Burnham is cool. Right? Like at the end of the day,
Sisko's
not
cool.
so the thing about Burnham is, you mentioned this, Grant, this show has done something that's a little bit different, in that it has attracted people who haven't traditionally been Trekkies. So to have somebody like Burnham, Sonequa Martin-Green in this role, you've got somebody who's cool, who's relatable to people outside of Trek. So she's a role model in that way, right? Sisko, Picard, Janeway, like
Cisco was cool.
No.
What year? During which season did Thong Song come out?
Donk, 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 donk.
I mean, when you look at all the characters that you would look and say, like, for those of us who are huge Geordie LaForge fans, Geordie has zero cool. Right? I love LeVar Burton.
Geordie's
Zero
cool.
cool. Okay. Like, and if you take away characters, and again, I don't appreciate this trope, but if you take away some of the stellar female leads, like a 7 of 9, and I hate to mention this, to Paul, Belana Torres, if you take, Troy, you take away their sexuality, then that it wasn't about their coolness, it was about their sexuality. So the thing that you have in Burnham is she's a role model, because people can turn on the show and be like, yo, she's like, I want to be like her. Right. And then the whole thing's about the leadership, the selflessness, the STEM, all those things come in because she doesn't fit the traditional like sci-fi archetype.
Right. And I think, the other point, I think, to why her like romantic, to go back to why her romantic relationships are important is not to take away the idea that you can't be a sexy, badass, smart Trek lady character, right? It's just like where the perspective and the character is being written from. In the Slack channel today, we were talking about the difference between the male gaze and the female gaze, and just how you can see the differences in, movies like Wonder Woman and how Wonder Woman is shot and the costumes when it's the Wonder Woman movie versus the whatever the one with the Batman is where Wonder Woman appears. I don't know.
There's a whole conversation about Batman and that
League.
cod piece. So just say
Yes. And then also when you think about Harley Quinn in a lot of the early other DC movies versus Birds of Prey, right? Costume choices, how characters are being shown and written and talked about. And I think we see Burnham has the capability, I think, to hopefully eventually take ownership of her sexuality and to own that part of her, instead of it being something that's just written to be something to make people want to watch you. And that's like the main difference for me. Because I don't like when we have to put women characters in a quarter where they have to be sexless in order to be people we can look up to and to be these idealized forms that are great for people to look up to. I think sexuality can also be a part of that, but I bet it has to be that owned sexuality that is coming from the character and not from a man writing in sexuality. Does that make sense?
Very much. That's how I feel about Burnham. Like, there is no male gaze on Discovery, but I do find the character very affirmational and very, very sexy and very attractive because of who she is and everything that she can do. And it's not because of the show is filmed through it's not because of a tight bodysuit. It's not because the show is filmed through a male gaze. And I don't want to discount, even though characters like 7 of 9, Deanna Troi, and even T'Pol were filmed through that male gaze and shoved into these tight bodysuits for a reason back in the late 80s and 90s. I don't want to discount the fact that even though they were presented that way, I have met several women who were very inspired in a positive way by those characters.
Yeah, and Mariah, I think you bring up a really good point, and why I think this show, I'm hoping, is different, in that when you look at the sci-fi genre and these and not just sci-fi, but just these nerd geek kind of mediums, right? Whether it's sci-fi or comic books or video games, there is a certain way that women have been depicted by the male gaze, the male dominant writers, for what feels like a millennium. And I think we are finally starting to see that change. And again, to your point, it's not about making them sexless, but it's about making it more than just the exaggerated bustier and tight bodysuit, right? Like it's let's give them the three-dimensionality that we've given, male characters like, a Riker, right? And that might be going a little too far, but also like, and if you think about Star Trek, most of the male characters have had a love arc in it, whether it was Geordi or even Data had a love arc where, I mean, maybe it was placed on him, but there was a woman who had kind of was going through trauma and kind of latched on to Data. Like they've all had these kind of like love arcs. And so now I think we're seeing the same thing. They are writing Burnham as a fully fleshed out character and not as a vehicle to bring in viewers.
Yes.
Yeah.
100%.
And just a couple more quick comments. Home Chickie had a lot of great things to say about Burnham. She said it was weird and interesting that the star of the new Star Trek show was not the captain, like we talked about, and not even always a bridge officer, but I grew into it. I kind of love Michael Burnham and all her intricacies. And Karen, who everybody knows on our Slack as Karen Chu, she says, when Michael clicked for me was magic to make the sanest man go mad. The entire opening and her fear of attending the party, her reactions there, and the entire reversal of her certainty was so familiar to me. It's the first time I saw me represented on Star Trek. That's great. I kind of felt the same way in that episode.
Yeah, I love. There's that one line from James on our Slack who just the first line got me. It was like, I like characters weighted with regret.
Yeah,
I was like, it's so true that like that initial introduction and that weight is kind of always there. And I don't know if it's still regret now, but it's definitely something that it's those puzzles and those decisions you made like 15 years ago that'll wake you up in the middle of the night and you're like, why did I say that weird thing to that person? Hers is obviously of a much larger scale, but I can relate on that one small level.
I think I've seen this more and more in writing of characters in movies and film, TV, where you see these mild anxieties play out that are so much more human and relatable than these crazy contrivances that these plots will come up with, and how easy it is to make a character more endearing to you just because, oh my God, they agonize over how close to stand to other people in an elevator or what their hands are doing in a certain moment as they're talking to someone and thinking it's stupid that they held their hands up a little too high or something. Just like such insane little minor details of anxiety that I see them writing into these characters. Like I'm like, yes, I get that. I identify with you in a way that all of these other elements that you spent time writing for this character did not make me feel like I got to know them. It's a fascinating shortcut that I think I've seen a lot more in the past like decade than the decades before in a lot of story or character development.
I think it's showing that so many non-sci-fi kind of shows have had an impact on just the way shows are written, right? And I think when you look at something like a Seinfeld, that is basically a show about just kind of exaggerating ever so slightly
it's a show about nothing.
But it's just like your normal day.
It's about nothing.
Yeah, and it's a show about nothing. But what people really gravitated to that was these are the conversations in some form of fashion or parts of conversations that you have had with your friends, right? Or you have thought in your head, and it's very normal. And you can go, all right, I can kind of see, I can see that. And now you're seeing that those little things are being weaved into the way people are telling stories because it's a way for you to really hook into this character. And it's like, oh, I'm not just reading about somebody who's got it all figured out and who's the greatest doctor on the planet. And I'm dealing with somebody who's not quite sure what to do with their parents who are getting older. Like, okay, I've had that question.
And it's so important how they've woven that into the narrative for season 2 in particular of Trek, where they are pressed for time and how much they can devote to giving individual side characters time to shine, right? But at the same time, you can have these small, very human interactions that are in a way so utterly mundane that they're so relatable. And you now have such a better idea of how these characters interact with each other, why they have grown to respect and love each other on this ship, and that strengthens those bonds later when they need that payoff for why X character would throw their life on the line for Y character.
Yeah, and to that point, Grant and Clyde, I want to mention something our listener Charlie said about Michael Burnham, and I think this is a great place to cap this discussion off. Charlie says, I think the struggles Burnham faced within the 2 seasons emotionally are the same ones a lot of people struggle with each day. Fitting in, social anxiety, not being enough. It's important for people to see that struggle and how it's dealt with through the character of Michael so that people know they aren't alone. It's great.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah. That's
Way to
perfect.
sum up what we just tried to talk about in like 20 minutes into one
Well
sentence.
said. Well said.
Charlie, you
My
put
dumb, inarticulate tongue couldn't do it.
Charlie, you put a bow on it. Thank
I'm
you.
not saying anything else from now on. That was it. I'm good.
Guys, this was a great discussion. I think this is one of our best episodes yet. I love diving into these characters. And listener, thank you so much for joining us on Star Trek Discovery Pod. Remember to visit StarTrekPod.co to subscribe on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcast.
Yeah, in about 2 weeks, we're also going to dive into and talk all about Saru and how he lost his ganglia. So get ready for that.
Of course, once again, if you guys are checking this out, maybe you've been a longtime listener and you've thought about trying to donate to us, but you're not really sure. Maybe that's not for you, or it's just too complicated. It's super easy. Go.
My mom figured it out. Anyone can do it.
Mariah's mom figured it out. Go into your dad's wallet, steal his credit card, go to patreon.com/Star Trek Pod, enter in those numbers on his credit card, and just make a $50 an episode pledge to our show, or $2 an episode is going to be great. We put out like 2 episodes a month at this point, so I think that's $4. Sometimes we do up to 4 episodes a month, $8. And we try to make it a great deal for you guys. You can come join us over on the Slack channel. We're doing a bunch of really cool exclusive content for the patrons, including a best of 7 series that Mike and Mariah are doing. And we really tried to make it worth it for all of you guys. We would love to have you come join us. Star Trek Pod, patreon.com/Star Trek Pod. There it is.
And remember, if you want to share that you've enjoyed this incredible episode, you can hit us on all of the socials. Our socials are on Twitter and Insta at Star Trek Pod. So hit us up at Star Trek Pod. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah.
Share this particular episode.
Slide in our DMs.
You can also do that. That's just creep up on us.
Either way. And also, before we go, I do want to mention we are covering on Patreon, I think dropping this coming Monday, Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home, the one with the whales. So if you want to listen to that, we also covered Star Trek 2, Star Trek 3, and now we're doing 4. It's going to be a good time. So yeah, patreon.com/Star Trek Pod. Clyde, where can we follow you online and hear more from you?
I'm a little silent, but if you want to get at me, you can hit me up at Clyde Haynes on Twitter, and you can get me on the web at keyandclyde.com. That's KEI and Clyde.com.
What about you, Mariah?
I'm at Mariah Gossett on all social platforms. That's Mariah with a Y and a Gossett with 2 S's and 2 T's.
Grant Davis.
At Baron Von Grant, I check them all obsessively. It's sad, so I'll get back to you. And
Follow me on Twitter at Mike Moody. Live long and prosper.
Bye.
Bye.
Stay safe.